Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Ready Steady Play podcast. I'm joined as usual by my co-host Barry.
Hello, hello.
And of course I am Mike, and we're going to get straight into board game news. This is the killer headlines you've all been waiting for. Nothing but the best from us. Actually, do you know what? Before we do that, I'm going to have to do some corrections.
Errata in this podcast.
I know. But we of course strive to maintain journalistic integrity here on the podcast.
That doesn't sound right, but I don't know any better.
It's very important to us. So you might remember way back in podcast 5 when we talked about Andromeda's Edge and the difference between dwellings. That episode apparently went up on the Board Game Geek page for Andromeda's Edge. So then Peter, who is the publisher of Andromeda's Edge, has responded to us. Peter Vaughn. He's the founder of Cardboard Alchemy. And of course, he used to work at Breaking Games as well and brought dwellings to them. So here are some clarifications from him on the discussion that I had. He says that the rulebook for Andromeda's Edge is not 3 times the length of the rulebook in Dwellings of Eldervale. It is the same style, which means it's 3 rulebooks, a main rulebook, a appendix that covers all the different tokens and various elements of the game, as well as a solo book, which he says are the same length. And he's pretty right about that. They actually are all roughly the same length. And note that, because we strive for journalistic integrity here.
And not hyperbole.
We've got some stats, some numbers, some facts, which includes the rulebook for Andromeda's Edge is 28 pages. The final page is an icon glossary. And the rulebook for Dwellings of Eldervale is 24. The final page is actually a storage solution, or a guide to the storage solution. Which is separate in Andromeda's Edge.
I'll do some quick math on that. What's 4 pages? Like 12% difference?
No, I didn't do that much math, Barry. Don't put out any more erroneous numbers. We've got the appendixes. The Andromeda's Edge appendix is 28 pages, and the Dwellings of Eldervale appendix is 20. And the solo rules for Andromeda's Edge is 11 pages, but it's worth noting that this isn't just the solo rules, it also includes a few little modules and things. It's 11 pages plus an icon glossary at the back. For Dwellings of Eldervale, it was 8 pages. So Andromeda's Edge is slightly longer, but certainly not the 3 times the length that I made it out to be. Peter also indicates it is about a 40-minute per player game. Which, if I think about it, is probably about right. I think he says a 2-player game should be done in an hour and a half. Again, that depends on what format you're picking, whether you decide to include an AI or a solo bot in the game, which I did. I did play that with Mark. We played the solo mode. Well, we played 2 players with a solo bot, which really changed the feel of the game and made it longer. But 40 minutes per player seems about right. And Peter highlights as well that when he worked at Breaking Games and they published Dwellings of Eldervale, the game was his idea and he took it to Luke Laurie, the designer, who made an excellent design for it. He says, I developed it, I did the art direction and the manufacturing work and crowdfunded it. And then after that, he went off to found Cardboard Alchemy and he wanted to work with Luke again on another big box game, which is now Andromeda's Edge. So, of course, it is important to have feedback from the people who are working on these things and make sure we give credit where credit's due. And of course, I think we can get a little focused on the designers and their role in the process and overlook the very important role of development, design, art direction, as well as coordinating manufacturing and crowdfunding. So very happy to offer up these corrections from Peter and move on to the news.
And now the news. What's new? What's exciting?
Well, I'm excited about the Kemet Blood and Sand reprint on account of the fact that they've included a big box. And I'm a sucker for big boxes. And the original box was not quite big enough.
Was the last Kickstarter not a big box? Because this is a reprint of the Kickstarter that they did.
So
the reprint of a reprint, right?
This is an important correction that I think has actually caused some dismay in the community before, because people see big box and sometimes they think all-inclusive edition with every expansion and promo. And sometimes they see big box and they think storage solution for all the bits I already have. And those are two distinct things, but they're both called big box. And I don't know if it doesn't seem to take long to do the research, but sometimes it can be a little confusing. The original Kemet Blood and Sand was a big box in the sense that it included a lot of the content. It wasn't actually all-inclusive, because original Kemet had the set expansion, which added one versus many, and they didn't include that element when they did Blood and Sand. So Blood and Sand is sort of a reprint, redressing, reincorporation of all of the sort of the Kemet stuff that had come before.
1.75.
Yeah, 1.75. Didn't include a sort of a big box storage solution, included a new game box in addition to a lot of other content, but the game box, if you got the all-in set, which included some new little bits, was struggling to fit everything. So it's nice to have a sort of big box storage solution. The new campaign also includes that set stuff, the one versus many, or at least they're exploring publishing that as well.
Okay.
Because people have been asking for it.
Still unclear. So by big box, is this getting everything, or is this getting a large storage solution?
Both.
So this time it's both.
This time it's both. It will be the new large storage solution with everything in it if you pledge at that level. Gotcha. You can still get that original core box, and you can still just pick up some extra bits from the original campaign. That's all back on offer, but they've included this new set expansion for the one versus many mode, which was omitted originally in the first campaign, and a new big box storage solution, which you can get with everything in it.
Well, I do like your idea of the crossover with SETI for the aliens coming down to build pyramids.
That's the next one. Contact CG in their SETI game.
Kemet's one of the games I've never actually managed to get to the table yet, or play. I know somebody that has it. He's played it. I've never managed to sit down at the same time. Same with Clash of Cultures. I know it's not quite the same, and Cyclades as well. Just and they're being redone, but never managed to get them for any of those. And I wouldn't mind a bit of area control, people on a map type game. Any good?
Yeah. So, I mean, I really like Kemet. It's part of Matago's trilogy. I mean, they'll just come up with these ideas for series whenever it suits them. I think originally they had their sort of area control series, which was Inish, Kemet, and Cyclades.
Yeah.
And they were like, oh, but with different sort of core mechanisms, right? Because in Kemet, you've got these three marketplaces that also doubly function as 3 or 4 marketplaces that doubly function as like tech trees. And so as you buy the monsters from the bottom row to add to your army, monsters and upgrades from the bottom row to incorporate into your faction, developing asymmetrical forces and powers, you will then be able to progress up that tree and get more and more powerful things. Additionally, these will combo with the other markets in different ways. So Kemet's sort of like area control, build your own army kind of deal. And then, of course, Inish was famously drafting, and Cyclades famously auctioning.
Yeah. I've played Inish, at least.
So, and then Inish is now part of, it's sort of segued into the Christian Martinez political series with Galactic Renaissance. So that's like now its other series as well.
Venn diagram.
Yeah, exactly. Inish is the in the center of the overlap.
Yeah. So
Kemet follows that same kind of idea that you see certainly in Cyclades and a little bit in Inish, which is that, and you see it in Cthulhu Wars as well, which is this sort of like everyone's within a very small distance from one another and can access the other players very quickly. And so it's sort of brutal combat, area control, and you're building up these monuments and trying to control them to generate resources, to buy these powers, to continue to escalate your forces. Now, I remember enjoying the original Kemet a lot. So when the Blood and Sand reprint came out, I jumped on it. I got everything that was available in that campaign, and I've not yet been able to get it to the table. No. I'm very upset.
Very sad.
So I've not actually played Kemet, but Blood and Sand. I've just played Kemet.
Ye oldie one.
But but I do have the product, and it did come with these lovely trays for all the technologies and stuff to speed up setup. Like because all the I say technologies, they're upgrades and monsters, and they're all tiles, and laying them out took a long time and things like that. So it's nice to have all these sort of solutions they've implemented. I think if you love Kemet, then this is like a no-brainer. And if you're interested in Kemet, then Blood and Sand's probably not a bad place to kick off. I cannot advocate getting the all-in just because it's expensive, and also I can't really speak to the quality of the expansions too much. They also added in a lot of little modular bits that I just haven't tried, so...
I'm sure there's a Cthulhu module as well now, right?
Oh, yeah, no, 100% there is. Actually, this is a story from the original campaign. They added in a Cthulhu module, and then everyone was so annoyed about it, they took it out. And then everyone was so annoyed, they took it out. They put it back in as an optional buy.
You can please some of the people some of the time, right?
Yeah, but it turns out that there's as many people who love the Cthulhu modules as there are people who really don't.
Yeah. Yeah, makes sense. Optional buy, the best way there.
So that's the Blood and Sand reprint. It's on GameFound right now.
Very good, very nice. Well, from big box to small box. What a segue. I've noticed some Essence coming up. Only 2-3 months away from that. So things are being announced and looking into them. One of those games to come out at Essen will be Richard Garfield and Yellow's King of Tokyo Duel, following in the footsteps of Seven Wonders and Splendor with their 2-player only version. So King of Tokyo is a Yahtzee rules, which is chuck some dice, you get 2 rerolls to get what you want on the dice. Monster Battler with sort of standees, and then with the expansions, additional powers, or you can buy additional powers within the game, but within the expansions, unique powers. And that is being released as this 2-player version, which changes a little bit. The core rules are still Yahtzee, chuck the dice about, but it's now a tug of war game, which reminds me a lot more of Seven Wonders Duel with the military track, where in order for you to get ahead on that track, the other person has to be first brought down. So any progress you make is my loss. A little unclear yet as to whether you have to win on both tracks to win, or whether it'll be get to the end of one track to win. Having that sort of balancing between whether you're going to destroy the buildings or power up might be quite interesting. And I kind of went off King of Tokyo a little while ago. I still play at Board Game Cafe or whatever, but I don't own it anymore. Despite having a few of the expansions and power-ups. And I've never played King of New York, which is like a slightly bigger and different version of King of Tokyo. However, the Splendor Duel and Seven Wonders Duel have been so good that I'm always kind of immediately interested in these 2-player only versions that are coming out. And this looks like it could be pretty decent. However, we did play Grumblestone recently, which may scratch that itch. So we'll see what happens when it's out and I get a proper look at the rules.
Yeah, and we've spoken before as well about Dice Throne, and I do wonder, given I own an enormous amount of Dice Throne, if I have a lot of space in my collection for a game that... I mean, this is obviously only 2-player. Dice Throne, I only play it 2-player.
But you could go more.
You've said you've enjoyed it at higher counts, but I've never been inclined to try that. And in fact, when I've had higher player counts, we've just paired off for games of Dice Throne. But yeah, so I mean, I've played classic King of Tokyo. I've had a good time. I've never felt the need to own it. I've never owned it, but I would be happy to play King of Tokyo Duel. I just don't know if I'd be able to fit it in my collection next to Dice Throne.
Well, you can get 24 King of Tokyo Duels for every Kemet Blood and Sand big box. So if physical space is the problem, then there's a way to save some.
No, I don't mean physical space.
Yeah.
I just mean like how often does a situation call for a two-player Yahtzee style game?
Just play Yahtzee. Yahtzee's still good. Well, as good as it's ever been, let's put it that way.
Well, Yahtzee's got too much math. So now we're going to run as far away from dice as we possibly can and talk about the expansion for Gaia Project, a dry, deterministic Euro game that has no need for dice.
Yawn.
Gaia Project The Lost Fleet was announced a little while ago, and it is the expansion for Gaia Project. It is, I've heard, going to be available in very limited numbers for Gen Con, which means we may see a bigger retail release at Essen, or it could still be the case that it's just air-shipped copies at Essen and the retail release comes at some indeterminate time in the future. I did read through the rulebook, which came out about 4 months ago, so I'm just talking about it now because I remembered to. But there is a bunch of components in the new box that rebalance things from the base game. There are new factions, and they have lots of different new conditions around the way they start and the stuff they start with on the board. But the main difference between Gaia Project and the expansion seems to be two elements. One is, if you recall, there are if you've never played Gaia Project, I apologize. There are a communal set of actions called the QIC actions, and they are first come, first served universal actions any player can take, and you have to pay a very expensive resource in the game to access them. And those are on a central board, and now they're gone. In the expansion set, they're completely gone, and they've been moved to a set of 4 lost ships that are floating around the universe. And they all have slightly different flavors, slightly different things going on. Some of them have access to these powerful artifact tokens that you can unlock if you explore the ships. But the main element is that they have 3 actions on them, which includes these formerly universal actions that were on the main game board. Well, they're gone now, and they've been moved onto these ships, and you can only access them if you've explored the lost ships by finding them on the board. So, much less universal. They will also have other types of actions on there as well that don't currently exist in the game, but which cost resources that do exist. So they'll be sort of familiar resource costs. So it's effectively couching these universal actions in these areas of the board that you need to explore and race with other players in order to explore. And they may give you access to some fancy tokens as well. The other thing the game adds is asteroids, which are a form of proto-planet. If you've played Gaia Project, you know that the proto-planets are the planets that you must Gaia form into any other biome that you want to make, or well, actually you don't. You make them into universal planets, but they're functionally any biome you want. The asteroids are new forms of the protoplanet that can be Gaia formed into the Gaia worlds, but at the cost of the Gaia former. So you must remove it from the game after using it. I like Gaia Project. I don't know if I have ever reached a level of play with Gaia Project where it needs an expansion. I've also played it solo a few times, and during my exploration of the solo mode, and there's a big solo scene for Gaia Project, actually. There are monthly challenges that go up in the community on BGG, and everyone tries to get the highest score on the monthly challenge and competes over it, which is really, and people do whole write-ups of their attempt this month. What I did find when I was exploring that side of the game is that people have really sort of gone deep on this game. There's a lot of analysis around strategies, standard openings, the sort of route through the scoring tiles based on the way they've come out during setup and things like that. So people are really into it and take it very seriously. I don't know how I feel about all of that, Barry.
What, a bunch of nerds nerding out?
Well, from a sort of ideological, abstract design perspective, I would prefer a game that is necessarily less prescriptive, right? It is not the standard opening is not necessarily calculatable, but that comes back to sort of the concept of determinism, doesn't it? Because if the game is deterministic, then you can functionally analyze the best possible opening and learn it. And then it, got me thinking about skilling games and how, a big part of skilling games is just learning the game and learning the standard openings and the strategies and implementing them. And then it got me thinking about how, competition's important in competitive games. You must play to win because otherwise the competition will fall apart. But it's always nice to have everyone on the same playing field, and how also the ability to learn a game and learn new strategies and implement these things over and over again is a major part of replayability. And then I just started to realize, this is a whole topic, and we don't have time for it.
Very true. However, I am almost the other side of the fence on that one. With I'm not against rote openings, and some sort of very deterministic openings. Game like I don't know if you've ever played Nippon. There's like 4 different ways you can open, and depending on your player order, what one you're likely to get and what comes out. And I don't mind learning those. And it's the same with Terra Mystica. I don't care for Gaia Project. I've never enjoyed the game I've played of it, but I do enjoy Terra Mystica. And the race for turn 1 Terra Mystica to either potentially build your temple or your stronghold is part of it. Not every race wants to go for that, and it also depends what's in there. Looking at some of the fan factions, even something like the Atlanteans have 3 or 4 strong turn 1 openings, but you'd have to know what you're going for sort of at the beginning to go for it. And whilst your thought there on whether the spirit of competition and designing things for high level competitive play is something considered, but primarily through the lens of a CCG or a card game, because whilst you can't design a collectible game for just the top players, when most of your money comes from the casual players, and so you do have to account for something that can be broken, but you have to give people powerful enough cards in this instance to be able to find combos themselves much more readily at the kitchen table. And yeah, it's interesting. You just made me think there of what was that Fred Savage film, The Wizard, where they go to the video game championships and they play Super Mario Brothers 3 for the first time on the NES. Showing my age a little bit there. I'm going to presume you've never seen it. But there, where you've got the skills developed through years of Super Mario 1 and 2, coming into something that is the same building blocks but a brand new kind of competition is where I see these expansions, a use for those expansions. Once you've exhausted a lot of the base game, having a fresh set of competitive changes makes a lot of sense to me. So yes, it could well be its own topic, however, also something worth considering.
Yeah, I think if you're at a stage of competing in Gaia Project where you and your Gaia Project group are familiar with the standard openings for each of the existing factions and which one to deploy based on the supply of scoring tiles and the factions other players have, and you're using the drafting and things like that to pick your factions, I think this is definitely going to add some value if a sort of a reset to the discovery of that competitive process is something that appeals to you, would add value to you. If you're happy to exist within your well-established competitive paradigm, then and this is going to upset that, maybe you're less interested. I don't know, but on that point as well, they have added, it seems, a more formal drafting process for the factions in this expansion. So I don't know if that was. I remember the Terra Mystica drafting. I don't know if that was ever formalized. Yeah, was that ever formalized in the rules,
yes,
or was that always a fan thing?
So if you didn't do a points buy, you just picked them, you'd have a victory point swing built in. And each of the subsequent expansions that introduced new races gave a full table of competing against the other races as to who should start on more points than or lose some points to begin with.
But I do think if you've never played Gaia Project before and you're like, is this expansion an auto-include? No, absolutely it's not. This is for people who are deep into their Gaia Project and who've played a lot.
How old is Gaia Project now? Like maybe...
I think I bought it at Essen 2017.
2017, yeah, so 7 years maybe. And it's not had an expansion all this time, so you've got a fair bit of play in it before you need it, right?
Yeah, exactly right.
Very good, very nice. Let's talk another expansion in that case then. And I will talk I think it's just called The Expansion. It's auf Deutsch, Die Erweiterung, for Anno 1800. So this is a game by Martin Wallace and released by Cosmos, and is based on the video game of the same name. So Anno 1800, having never played the video game, is a trading game, a sort of community building or team building, resource building kind of game where you go out and discover different lands to trade with and new inventions and come back and produce what they need, sell it to them at a profit and whatnot. I believe there's more to the video game than there is in the base board game. The base board game is very much a case of working up technology trees, which the video game is like as well, to get the things that are worth the most points at the end. There is some exploration where you find different lands and the way you go about it, whether you got shipping or whether you control those resources and kind of sell them to other players. A few things going on with it.
Just to jump in and make sure that I've got this clearly in my mind as well, because we both played Anno 1800, but I think you played it more than I did actually.
Yeah.
But it is obviously, it is Age of Discovery colonialism, isn't it?
Yes.
And it is building up a sort of European colony that produces resources in order to fulfill contracts. And you've got this big hand of contracts that, if I remember correctly, just kind of keeps going and amassing.
Yeah, the game just kind of scales up and you can fulfill, once you've got a resource, you've got it.
Yeah, so the production system that you're establishing in front of you is a series of increasingly upgraded buildings that just produce resources. But this is like just have access to that resource, and you can buy resources from other players' machines as well, I think, to fulfill this massive hand of contracts that you've got. And then certain resources can only be acquired by revealing discovery cards that represent the new world. So that's going to be things like your cocoa and tobacco. But the hand of cards itself, which is all this massive amount of contracts, the game ends when somebody empties their hand, right? Yeah,
I think that's true.
They want to get rid of all of their contracts, but it's a struggle because I think you have to just keep taking them in order to get more. You get these little cubes that enter your system for every card you take, and then the cubes move around. They represent workers and move around the system, turning on the factories to complete the contracts, which are the cards.
Yeah, and there's different coloured cubes to represent different types of workers, and only some can activate some production.
Yeah, this was a game where you would have a hand of something like 20 cards, all contracts you're manically trying to fulfill before the game ends. And I was very grateful to have my game topper for that because, good lord.
Yeah, it's not too bad space-wise, but yeah, there's a lot just out there to look at. But I, as you mentioned, I enjoyed the base game. I borrowed it from you to play, and then I played another couple of games, and then some of the flaws, to my mind, kind of came through. Like, it was initially very interesting and very exciting to see the different tech trees. It's like, okay, well, I can I produce this, which gives me access to glass, which gives me access to perhaps something to do with steel, which then gives me the cogs to build the machinery. And that was it felt good going up those chains and the little sort of strategy and tactics you could use to, well, I'm going to go shipping and I'm going to control all the purple inventions, which are like the high level ones or whatever. But then the more I played it, the more it became, actually, the tech tree is very uninteresting. Now, I did play mostly at 3 or 4 player, and so everything was always out. So at worst, I just had to pay somebody a couple of coins to get the resource I needed. And it wasn't so interesting how to go about that. Sure, I'd want to produce a building where maybe I had 2 or 3 contracts that all require tobacco or something. So I'd want a building that produced tobacco. But if I only ever needed a piece of glass once, I could just buy it from somebody, and somebody else would have had the contracts that needed glass, and so glass would be out. It became a little uninteresting trying to work your way through that tech tree at the right times. It was still interesting to get to the top of the tech tree because those were worth points, but it just the novelty of it wore off quite quickly after sort of 2, 3, 4 games. So this expansion may fix some of that, right? So in this, it's got patents to protect industries. So that, to my mind, will solve some of the problem where you just have access to everything. If those patents restrict you in some way of using somebody else's resources, then that opens up that bit of the game again where the tech trees become interesting. It's got airships in this one, which I think was in the video game, but airships open up different trade options. In the base game, you have to use ships to go to the new world and get a random kind of resource or contract from them. They say contracts open new strategies. I'm not sure what those new contracts are going to look like or how they'll be different. And innovations to boost efficiency. So whereas previously, you got to use a certain number of workers to get the sort of production you need, maybe there's ways of automating some of that, or using your cubes in a slightly different way for that efficiency. So looks interesting. Like I say, I did enjoy the game initially, and then when those flaws became apparent, I was less interested in it. This may be enough to make me get it to the table again and give it another go.
Yeah, I'd certainly be interested in giving the expansion a try. I didn't dislike the game enough that I wouldn't be curious about it, but having said that, you're right. I felt after a play or 2, I was more or less done with it. Yeah,
he'd seen it all at that point, and it wasn't super tactical or particularly, cutthroat or anything like that. So it wasn't a keeper.
I remember, I'm trying to remember exactly, but obviously, like you say, the contracts are looking for different resources, and so ideally, what you want is 5 contracts that all want glass. But if I remember correctly, you have very little agency over which contracts you actually get.
Yeah, correct. You're kind of drawing blind, and you got some random ones at the start. But obviously, the random ones at the start are the ones you're working towards, and there is some filtering, but it wasn't a huge part of it. And actually, that visiting the new world was... I can't remember. I might have house ruled it after that first game, where it's like, look at 2, keep 1, rather than just get the top one, because sometimes you would miss wildly, and you'd spend a lot of effort to go to the new world.
Who's got time for games or house ruling, Barry? Get them out of here. But I will actually have a look at this expansion. If the chance to play it comes up, I'll have a crack at it. But nice. I don't know if I'll go out of my way.
Anything else new that you've seen?
Just the last thing for me, really, that I wanted to mention was there are some new mini expansions coming for Cosmic Frog. Have you played it?
Heard of it, but never played it.
Cosmic Frog is designed by Jenna Felly and published by Devious Weasel Games, and it's a really, really, really weird game. You are playing a cosmic frog who lives in space, in the 9th dimension or something. Oh boy, it's weird. And you get these asymmetrical powers, abilities, and effectively the board is a series of landscapes floating in space. And then there's a sort of a deep space track off to the side, outer dimensions. And you want to functionally hop onto the planet, consume a landscape tile, potentially hop around, consume some more, and then hop out into space, fly off to your vault, disgorge the land into your vault from your gullet, and then repeat, filling up your vault with all the different land that you want to collect in there.
Interesting.
Oh, there's lore. There's deep lore in the rulebook to justify all of this. I just can't remember it all off the top of my head. But what this sort of amounts to, because the vault itself has quite a intricate scoring system for the tiles, the way they're laid out, and they can also be piled on top of each other, and you will remove them one at a time as you score them, potentially revealing different scoring layouts. So there's quite an interesting sort of geographical, multi-layered spatial puzzle going on in the vault. There is also a bunch of restrictions on the planet as you move around, trying to pick up the landscape tiles. And then you also are able to just like punch each other, forcing enemy frogs to vomit up the tiles they've kept in their gullet in the reverse order in which they consumed them, so that you can grab them. So if you want the one at the bottom of their gullet, you're going to have to punch them a whole bunch. It's kind of madness. And what adds to the madness is that everyone starts with these really quite impactful asymmetrical abilities. And then every so often, those just all change. You know?
Pretty cosmic.
And I do believe, if I'm remembering correctly, it's got that cosmic encounter thing where you can keep the ability hidden until you use it. And then you reveal it and go, aha.
Gotcha.
So it's got quite a... It is a complicated game. It's definitely a hobby game. But it is, at its heart, chaotic gotcha. And it's very strange. I've thoroughly enjoyed all of my plays of it, albeit if you're looking at it as a very competitive experience, it can be quite frustrating. There is an action selection... The turn mechanism is very odd for a start. There is... Everyone's got, like, action cards, and the cards are just... You flip it over and it says you get to have a turn. And so we take all the action cards from all the players, we shuffle them up into a deck, and then we just flip over the cards moving through the deck. That means I think each player gets 3 actions. So that means if you get your 3 up top, that means for the rest of the round you're not having any actions. So It's like you've got to like plan around that, you know? And so you can sort of card count as you move through the round, trying to work out who's had their actions, who hasn't, how many each player has left. And, you know, but if somebody gets all their actions early, they're probably going to spend the rest of the game getting punched so people can steal their land.
Not good yet.
Yeah, and if you get punched too hard, you'll fly off into the outer dimensions and you'll have to work your way back. It's really bizarre, but like I said, I've thoroughly enjoyed it. It's a really funny, good time. I do think it will appeal to people who like this sort of like complex hobby rules that are underpinning chaos. So people who like Wonderland's War, people who like Galaxy Trucker. Mm-hmm. You know, I don't want to mention Cosmic Encounter because I don't think that's complicated. You know, that's quite straightforward actually. But, you know, these games that require a bit more familiarity with hobby premises. Anyway, there's an expansion called Find Muck. I haven't played it. I do have a copy. I'd love to get it to the table as soon as I can, but I haven't had a chance to play it yet. It adds new abilities. It adds some fun new tokens. So I'm keen to get stuck into that. But there are 2 new mini expansions available from Devious Weasel Games, which are, as far as I can tell, just new ability cards. So they are just going to make the range of abilities in the game more diverse. And there's one for the base game and one for the Find Muck expansion. 2
sets of cards, the Devious pack and the Gluttony pack. And a total of 30 new cards just to use. Okay.
And those packs are being put out alongside a complete reprint. So if you've been looking for Cosmic Frog and or Find Muck, and you've been struggling, they are available they will be available from Devious Weasel's website. Of course, the caveat is that they are based in the States. So if you're in Europe, the shipping could be pretty hefty. But I don't know how good their European distribution is. I know when they do a print run, copies do wind up in the wild over in Europe. There are some some distributors who stock them, but it's definitely
arguably
not...
just as difficult to get from Europe as the US these days.
Yep, there's also that if you're here in the UK. So, if you definitely want to make sure you get it this print run, you're probably safest going to Devious Weasel, albeit you'll have to ship it from the States.
Nice. And quite a few artists on Cosmic Frog. So just a look designed by Jenna Felly, but Tim Barton, Jenna Felly, Chad Hoverter, Tani Petite, and Naomi Robinson. And looking at the crazy, wacky out there art, they obviously went to the forest to do mushrooms together or something before designing it, or before drawing it.
It's got a wonderful look and a wonderful aesthetic. It's really an appealing product. The actual game, though, I think will be quite polarizing.
Fair enough. Well, just one last game for me that I'd seen. I think it's coming out pretty soon. I'm not sure if it's held back for Essen or if it'll be out before then, but it is a game called Temple Code. In fact, I think it's actually available in French already. Originally published in French by Banki's edition. And this is a game designed by Johan Levitt, who also made Turing Machine, and I've been playing a lot of Turing Machine on Board Game Arena. He also made Archaeologic, which I didn't get a chance to play, and I did see Chronologic at the Games Expo, but it was all in French again, so mon français c'est pas bien, and there was paste-ups of the rules and stuff to go over, but I never got a chance to play it either. But if you've not seen the previous games, so Turing Machine in particular, that is a game where you are trying to guess a 3-digit code against verifiers that the game provides, and it was all done very cleverly, very algorithmically, to ensure that only a single number 3-digit code matched all the verifiers correctly, and the game's about guessing those. This game seems a little more like Mastermind. If you've played Mastermind, you have a 5-digit code. In fact, if you've not played Mastermind, you might be more familiar with Wordle. Wordle is just Mastermind with letters instead of colours. But basically you're looking to match a series of, within Mastermind, 5 colours, and whether something's in the right place or is the right colour in the wrong place, are clues that you're given. This is similar. You're trying to get a 3-digit code for the symbol and colours, and it's all done by testing cards against your card, and if they line up over each other, then you've got the right symbol in the right place. Otherwise, you've got to try and figure out what's not displaying. Your code is facing everybody else, whereas you don't know your code because it's on the other side of your screen. And it seems to be quite a light, simple enough deduction game. I do like deduction games, and this sort of thing might complement Break the Code or Break the Cube. Again, Break the Code you can play on Board Game Arena, but just something that is enough to get the brain working, but not something you're going to be spending all day or all evening playing, unless it's multiple games. And it looked quite interesting, so I am down for some more deduction.
Nice.
So on to what we've been playing.
Yep, so that's everything for the news, and there's definitely no more news, nothing else that's happened.
Yeah, don't worry about it. Get all your news here. Don't look anywhere else. So
we've got would you like to start? Because I think you've got more headlines than me this time.
I do a little bit. I mean, I've certainly played a lot of games since we last spoke, and also in real life rather than on Board Game Arena. I finished the Lost Ruins of Arnak campaign. So Lost Ruins of Arnak, designed by Elwyn and Min and published by CGE. And this was a big hit, or the base game was a big hit, like, I don't know, 4 years ago now. Is that true? Am I making that up? A few years back, and a lot of people really liked it at the time, and I was one of those. I bought the game. I enjoyed the game for what it was, which is a lot of it sort of resource gathering, convert your resources into other resources, and then spend your resources to get points. But the way you do that is by going out into the jungle, right? So you'd spend some resources to travel, and then you would get you'd find a temple. That temple would give you resources, but there would be a guardian which you'd have to overcome or run away from. And then using those resources, you would go up the main temple track, which was the main research track, where you're gathering clues about the island and pushing forward for points, getting research assistance, and things along those lines.
At its very core, Arnak is deck building and worker placement. And you are building up a deck of cards on your turn. You're playing out all the cards in your hand, which gives you currency to buy more cards. And additionally, you're also putting one worker out. Unlike June, Imperium, which is often compared to, you don't need cards to play workers, but you do need symbols that come from the cards to play into certain spaces. And then, as you say, you're unlocking more worker placement spots in the board, moving progressively away from your base camp as you go, unlocking more powerful spots that are more expensive to unlock for everybody as you go.
Yep. And you can buy equipment which goes into your deck. You can unlock artifacts which you get a benefit from and goes into your deck. But the main way of getting points within the base game was this big temple track, and people said that the detractors of the game were like, oh, I don't like that I'm forced into going the temple route. Now, I don't think that's entirely true. I think, you'd have to be in part lucky, but also play for winning by going exploring and buying cards. But again, I don't mind that. Like, it's part of the game. Like, you are trying to uncover the secrets of the islands, going up that research track to figure out what's going on at the temples makes thematic sense to me. And then the first expansion had asymmetric player powers, where everybody had their own powers, and they were really, really diverse, really interesting. Some stronger than others, but all depends how you play.
But helpfully, they were also all graded by difficulty, so you could give the easy one to someone who's relatively new to the game, and the big complicated one to somebody who'd played a lot, which was nice.
Yeah, and they're not so complicated that you couldn't just start with them when you're teaching the game. But now, then the latest expansion was a proper publication of something that they released for free for download, which was a solo campaign, The Search for Professor Kootle. And this new expansion has a campaign which had 2 additional missions, and a lot of it was tidied up, and it was given a real professional shine up for what it did. So there's a whole thing where you can go through this campaign story by story. There's 6 missions in total. Each one you'll get some benefit going into the next one depending on how well you performed. You can't specifically fail a mission. You can always fail forward. So if you don't manage the main objective, you can fail forward, but you won't get the benefits of it. Or you can simply replay a mission. We failed one of the missions just towards the end, but we just chose to fail forward on that one, and it didn't impact our enjoyment of it.
You mentioned there that it was a solo campaign, but it's solo and co-op, isn't it?
Yeah, so sorry, the polished version of it took the solo campaign and made it 1 or 2 player. And the bits they added for the 2 player really make the game cooperative. Once per round you're able to share resources, and obviously you're working together to try and reach an overall goal. Each campaign or each scenario changes your goal in a way that makes the game fresh and new and interesting, and you could play those sort of scenarios out with the campaign if you wanted, but all the cards that are in them you can incorporate into the base game, and it all just works seamlessly. So I was having a very good time, did the first 4 missions, and then had a break for about a month or 6 weeks or so, came back to it, picked it back up again and finished the campaign, and I thought it was fantastic. In fact, like I said, the base game for me was okay. It was good enough to keep and play, but the campaign, really one of the best sort of campaigns I've played in a long time. It's short enough that you could play it all in a weekend if you wanted. It's 6 missions, maybe 90 minutes, 2 hours at the top end for playing a mission. Changes it up every single game. There's different things. It gives you new temples to explore. the first expansion also gave you some new temples to explore. Gives you new abilities, gives you new characters to play, adds a whole bunch of lore to the game, surprisingly. Like the island of Arnak becomes a much more vibrant and interesting place. So if you did find it a bit dry going up that temple track, understanding a bit more about the environment and what the Guardians are and how it all works was really interesting as well. I gave this
because that was a big joke in the original game, wasn't it? Because effectively the worker placement spots are concealed and randomized during setup, and then when you go, I think it's when you reveal it, you put a guardian out, or something like that. But the guardians are all these sort of like sort of vaguely supernatural, mythological takes on creatures you might otherwise find in the jungle. And there was a sort of a joke that they did that because they didn't want to have you harming actual wildlife. So instead, they're vaguely supernatural creatures that you either befriend or scare off.
Correct, yeah. You don't defeat them and by hitting them with a rock.
And the way it works in the game is if you beat them, you get to take the token and then you get to use it. And so I think it says somewhere in the rule book that you sort of befriend them or earn their respect, right? Because there is something sort of vaguely colonial about exploration and recovery of artifacts, right? You know, and we're all depicted as sort of, Indiana Jones style, like, European explorers, not exactly the most historically
unproblematic.
Unproblematic, not exactly culturally respectful people historically. So it's nice that they've sort of taken, and that might well have been the initial instigating reason why they've done that. I don't know personally, but it's nice that they've taken those guardians and fleshed them out and added lore and built around the lore of Arnak. It could have seemed like a cheap out to just have this vaguely fantasy setting to avoid all the problems of, European explorers. But I like fantasy settings, and if you have committed to one, it's cool that they've explored the lore and offered up more of it, because, as you say, in the core game and even in the expansion, it was somewhat lacking.
Yep. So if you did like Arnak and you liked the first expansion, you're almost certainly going to like this. If you were lukewarm on Arnak but you like co-op games, you'll almost certainly like this. If you never played Arnak and you like co-op games, I can 100% recommend it, even if that's all you do. Like I will be more than happy to play through that campaign again, either solo, with somebody else, make different decisions. There was loads of cards we didn't get. There's a bunch of endings to the campaign, depending on all your decisions throughout all 6 scenarios. And so we've seen one ending of what looked like there's at least 3, and also depending on your score, there's at least sort of 4 different variable outcomes from that as well. So I did cheat and look at the ending that we got, but with the next score up, because we didn't quite achieve the top score, and it was effectively a different outcome entirely to what happened. So the whole bunch of different endings to that were worth replaying, and can't recommend a campaign more, particularly since I've spoken out against those 100-hour plus campaign games so much already in this podcast.
Yeah, everyone, Barry's playing a fantasy campaign game after he said he hated them.
Yeah.
It's pure peak hypocrisy right here.
I say every scenario is its own game. It changes the rules up enough that it's just like playing a different version of Arnak. And even if you don't go on to play any more of the campaign, like, it's a complete experience on its own.
Yeah, I mean, I had I've played Arnak quite a lot, and I really enjoyed it too. And then at 4, I found it kind of creaks and groans under the weight of the downtime. And I've also heard people say, well, Dune Imperium is very similar. It's worker placement and deck building, but it's just better. And I would make the argument that Arnak has its roots much more in what feels like sort of Euro design, whereas Dune has got more sort of bonkers combos and is a bit more bombastic, and it's also got the conflict. But also June at 2 is not great. Like June excels at 4. At 3 it's fine, but it comes alive at 4 when all the worker placement spaces are really tight. Especially if you throw in any of the expansions with extra worker placement spaces. June really wants 4 players. And it's very clear, I think, given the sort of lack of major accommodation for 4 players in Arnak, that it was designed by a couple who probably did a lot of the playtesting together as a pair. I think if you're just to 2 players and you're looking for some worker placement deck building fun, I think Arnak is better than June. Whereas if you are 3 or more, really June is probably the better game, albeit they're only really being compared because they both utilize worker placement and deck building.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to throw Tyrants of the Underdark in there as well, again, sort of deck building, area control, slightly different again, but yes, I don't think they're the same game. They don't give the same feel. And
they work at sort of opposite ends of the player count spectrum as well.
Same mechanisms, but totally different game to my mind.
Yeah, there's a lot more sort of like Euro game calculations in Arnak. It feels a lot more like that kind of Euro game. June feels a lot more like a conflict game where you're very much keeping an eye on what everyone else is doing. Yeah, I like Arnak. I've actually got a copy of the campaign. I haven't managed to get it to the table yet, but I absolutely would bust it out. Yeah. All right, nice one. Well, going from Arnak to another historically themed game.
Terrible segue.
Well, there's a better segue that was sitting there, but I was like, I'm not talking about that game yet. Damn it. No, I have to go through the list in order. I'm going to talk about actually 2 games here that are sort of coming together as one topic, because one is Cascadero. I already talked about it in the last episode of the podcast. I played it again, this time with the game variant side. And also the new edition of Through the Desert, which was being published by Allplay. So they're both obviously designed by Rainer Knizia, but Cascadero is published by Bitewing Games and is a brand new title. And Through the Desert is published by Allplay and is a reprint of a very old Rainer Knizia game from the 90s. And both have a commonality in that on your turn, you play one single thing onto a board and that's it. But it could be called tile placement because the pieces you play could be tiles. They just aren't. They're meeples. But it doesn't matter because all the boards are hexagonal segments and you're claiming one on your turn and that's it. In Cascadero, you have your own player pieces that you're putting out to link up cities. And as you link up the cities, based on the unique situation when you first approach the city, you will be able to advance up some tracks. And as you advance up those tracks, you'll get bonus actions, which could involve playing another piece or just earning points or moving up another track, which could then allow you to place another piece. And those tracks have speed bumps on as well. So it's a game of sort of coordinating your expansion across the main board to synchronize with your ascension on these tracks in order to get everything to trigger at the right times and create a bonanza of advancement and points. Cascadero ends when somebody hits 50 in-game points or runs out of pieces to play onto the board. There is no final scoring. Whoever has the highest score at that time will win. Through the Desert is a hexagonal board that represents the desert. It has a big mountain in the middle and mountains around the outside. The new version of the game has an alternate board, which I haven't played, but that's also new, I think. Maybe there was an older version with that alternate board, but I didn't see it, so it couldn't have existed. It also offers some new modular expansions, which I also haven't played. I only played the original game with the new set. And in this game, you have caravans. And each player has a set of pieces that show the 5 different caravans of camels. They're camel caravans going across the desert, through the desert. And the 5 caravans are all different colors, and then each player has their own player color that's separate to those caravan colors. And you get 5 pieces in your player color that also match the 5 caravan colors. So these are your caravan leaders, and you're going to put out your leaders, and then you're going to put matching camels adjacent to your leader, creating a sort of a spreading path from your caravan leader. And so the first 2 rounds of the game are actually just every player playing all 5 of their leaders onto the board. So the game is already about sort of claiming positioning for the different colors. And this is really important because you're going to have more conflict with players if you put your caravan, let's say it's the red caravan, if you put your red caravan next to the red caravans of the other players. So you're already thinking, what colors am I going to invest in? What colors am I going to be using to block my opponent? And so forth. And what you're trying to do round to round, you get to play 2 camels actually. So Through the Desert's a little different. You get 2 pieces instead of 1. And you can pick any 2 colors or 1 color, 2 of the same color. And you're trying to connect up oases. If you get next to an oasis, you'll immediately get some points. There's also, or you have to get onto the oasis. You'll pick up a token that's worth points. So that's first come, first served. Then there's a watering hole where if you get next to it, you'll get some points. And then there's an element of sectioning off areas of the board. So if you complete a completely surround an area with your caravan in a specific color, that area becomes yours, and at the end of the game, it'll be worth points. There's also area majority, color majority. Whoever played the most red camels will get the award for the red camels. And there's 1 for each of the 5 colors. And so the game ends when 2 of the different colors of camels are empty. I think it's 2, it might be 1. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Some of the camels run out. Game's over. And then most of the points have already been scored, but you still need to count them all up. And you'll get those endgame points from areas you've managed to close off and the camel majorities. So we played a couple of games of Through the Desert. We actually played it once, and then we played it again. I was playing with my friend and his 12-year-old niece, and she's whip smart, super smart, really good at it. And I was reminded just how good Through the Desert is. It's just really, really, really solid. It's less than an hour. It's probably about 40 minutes. So it's really quick to play. But the amount of sort of crunch and decision space within the game is really good for a game of that length that's so quick and easy to set up. And you're thinking about your strategies right from the outset. In many ways, it is a game that you can lose during those first 2 rounds, but because it's so short, I think that matters less. And it's not impossible to come back from a bad setup, but similarly, once you've played a few times, you'll be eyeballing that setup and what's great about it is that there are some basic heuristics on the board, like where are the valuable watering holes? You want to be setting up next to those. You want to be around the cliffs or the board edge so you can more easily create those territories and section them off. But you want to be away from the other player colors. And that element is about understanding the other players and keeping an eye on where they're going and which caravan leaders they've put out. And it's just got a crazy amount of replayability. I feel like I could play it, back to back a bunch of times and not get bored of it. It's just really tight, and I can't really speak highly enough of Through the Desert. Yeah, so the new edition of Through the Desert, now there have been many editions that have come with many different kinds of pieces in the past, including some quite cheap editions. I cannot possibly comment on all of them because I've not played them all, but the version I played, which I think was Mayfair, had pretty cheap plastic camels, albeit they were very clear to look at. The new edition also comes with quite cheap plastic camels. They are hollow, and they're quite thin plastic, albeit the caravan leaders seem more solid and are mounted onto the little plastic ones. But you obviously have like tons of the camels that don't have the leaders on them. You could, as part of the Kickstarter, spend a stupid amount of money to get wooden pieces, which of course I did because I like Through the Desert a lot. And the wooden pieces are really, really nice. They're not screen printed. It's some kind of ink printing or something, but they look great. And I really like them. If I had any criticism of them at all, it's that the color of the leaders can be a little tricky to discern. But we didn't have a problem with it once we started playing. So there's that. But I don't know how available that deluxe upgrade is. I think probably quite available because it wasn't a Kickstarter exclusive. And from what I can tell, All Play keeps the deluxe components in print most of the time. So anyway, that's so you can pick up a copy of Through the Desert pretty cheap, or you can spend as much money again to get 80 wooden pieces or 100 wooden pieces.
I do feel like I have played Through the Desert, but I feel like I played it on an app.
It's not the same, Barry.
Yeah, I don't think it would be the same. Same thing. Like I played a few games of Tigris and Euphrates on the app as well, which was fun, but again, not the same as playing in real life. And I don't think I've ever played Samurai, which is the third game in that tile-laying trilogy.
Yeah, unfortunately, I've not had a chance to play Samurai either. We'll just have to wait for somebody to reprint it.
The front cover for Samurai looks like his Art of War. It must be the same company that publishes it, but Art of War was a truly terrible dice rolling game. And so I think I've just been put off from playing it. More Yahtzee rules dice rolling, except really, really bad.
Well, there you go. So don't bother with Art of War. But do bother with Through the Desert, and it's now back in print, and it deserves to be, and it's great. And that sort of served to highlight the shortcomings of Cascadero for me, I think.
Yeah.
Cascadero, I was not wild about after my first play, but it came with a alternate board. And on the alternate board, some of the cities are replaced with farmer tiles, which if you are next to, you can then jump onto to take a bonus action. And I liked the idea of that. I liked that they were sort of first come, first served, and it was another timing consideration, and they were sort of randomly distributed. So, and there is actually another tiny little modular variant that I haven't played yet, but...
Not enough to change up the core.
Yeah, and I think that where Cascadero... And Cascadero is far from a bad game. It's just that it's living in the shadow of... Babylonia and Blue Lagoon and Through the Desert, which are big boots to fill. And I also think all of those are better than Cascadero. And so I'm not sure the need of it. I think I really like that it's a sort of a race game to 50 points. And I really like that it doesn't have end game scoring. Those are actually two things that I've really looked at hard when I think about game design, because I love that it's like that, but I do think that there is an issue with accessing points in Cascadero, where it sort of fundamentally it seems like the areas where you can succeed don't award enough points to win. Or what I mean is you kind of... on the farmer side of the board, it felt like the strategic horizons were a little broader. On the other side, because you're getting most of your points from either advancing up the tracks or completing the objectives, probably both, right? And in the main game, we found the player who won did the public objectives, not really focusing on any of the first come first serve objectives, and then completed all the tracks. I did half the tracks and all the public objectives and some of the private objectives, or the exclusive objectives. And, I was close to the winning score, but I'd also sort of run out of steam because I'd ignored 2 tracks. And I just couldn't get high enough up those tracks to score points. The board was too congested at that stage. And so that's what I mean. Like, the winner was telegraphed quite early, and the moves, the final sort of 15 minutes of the game, felt largely redundant. The farmer side of the board felt better. It felt like there were more options, but again, it was quite apparent. And actually, we had an interesting situation where a player was on their final piece and had not won. So their final move was certainly redundant, but they'd sort of seen that coming for a little while as well and thought, I can't really catch up the leading player with my remaining pieces. And so I feel like there's a lot of weight in the decisions of placing out the pieces in Cascadero, and that feels really cool and really interesting, and it does a lot with quite a light rule set. I don't know if I like coordinating the tracks, but I think that's just me. Like, other players were really good at it, and they'd put out some pieces, and then they'd ping up a track, and that would trigger another track, and that would trigger another track, and they seem to do really well at it and enjoy it. So I think that's certainly not a criticism of the game, even though it's something I kind of struggled to engage with.
Yeah.
That sort of detail-oriented logistics. But what I do think it lacks is this sort of ability to sort of personally progress. You're not really developing much in it. The board state kind of remains, I mean, it develops a little bit, but very quickly it develops to sort of a state that remains stagnant. Like, what I mean by this is that although the board gets increasingly congested and your options become increasingly limited, which is fine, you know, for a game that has a sort of a narrowing of possibilities and you're trying to score points or survive the longest or whatever within this winnowing of potential, where Cascadero kind of falls down is that you want to be the second person to arrive at a city. Because if you are placing your first caravan at the city, well, actually, it doesn't matter as long as someone's already there, even you. If you're arriving at the city second, you get 2 bumps on the ladder. Sometimes, rarely, you don't need 2 bumps. But there's never a point where 2 bumps is bad, right? Sometimes it's just wasted. And so once you get to this point where you've got quite a lot of potential to arrive at cities and be the second person there, the game state doesn't really escalate from that. It's just then moving around the board to arrive at cities is harder. And I feel like when you're a race game that's first to a certain number of points and there's no end game scoring, you need to really accelerate all the way up to the end. So it needs to build pace and then boom, it's over. And Cascadero feels like it sort of gets into towards the end game as the potential winnows. It gets just fits and starts and then kind of loses its own momentum and becomes a bit jerky and it just loses the excitement.
Yep.
Solid game, but certainly not a standout Knizia, and there's a bunch of his other games I would pick over it. If you are interested in tile laying, competitive tile laying, if you're looking for something that's quick and savage, then you want Babylonia or Through the Desert. And if you're looking for something that's got some longer term strategic horizons, Blue Lagoon is a game of 2 phases. It's great, and you can see us play it on the show.
Nice. Wow. From tile laying to placing tiles, it's not quite the same. Placing tokens for this one. I finally got Battle for Rokugan to the table after it being on my shelf of shame, opportunity, whatever you want to look at it, for about, I don't know, 18 months, maybe close to 2 years. I'm not sure. I got it as part of a bundle of Legend of the Five Ring cards, the FFG LCG living card game that I bought, and then they threw in this game, and I've kept it since, and I've wanted to get it to the table before. I thought I'll just get rid of it, but I'll give it a game before I do. So Battle for Rokugan, designed by Molly Glover and Tom Jolly. I'm presuming not the guy from that prank phone TV show.
I think that's Dom Jolly.
Oh, right. Different guy.
Yeah. But if not, congratulations on your board game and first career.
I'm playing Battle for Rokugan. No, it's rubbish.
This is a joke that a very small number of people are going to get. Sorry, a reference.
Just people who watched it on Duvda. And anyway, published by FFG, Fantasy Flight Games. So Battle for Rokugan is set within Rokugan, which is the setting for the Legend of the Five Rings, which FFG purchased from, I want to say, AEG, who used to do the collectible card game before they massacred what was the card game, and nobody that used to play the old 5R likes new 5R, and I played a little bit of new 5R, but it was really long and boring, and whilst some expansions down the road fixed that. I never got into it, and eventually it died a death, which is how I picked up a collection from somebody else and got this game. But the Battle for Rokugan is a game for 2 to 5 players, set within Rokugan. You've got 7 clans competing for the land, along with the sort of shadow nations. Each player takes on the role of a clan, gets their own segment of land, and the game plays out by you draw 5 tiles from your pool. You have a fixed limit number of tokens within your pool, and each clan has a slightly different combination, but there's tokens that let you place armies, which can be used to attack or defend. There's tokens that let you vie for diplomacy, where no attacks or can come into that land. You can perform tokens that will let you perform a raid, which will blow up a land, make it unusable. You'll scorched earth it. There's shinobi, which are good for attacking at a distance. You don't need adjacency. What else is in there? There are a couple of different tokens that do different things, and on your turn you're going to place one of those tokens going round until you've put the 5 tokens down. Oh, sorry, there's also a bluff token which you have access to every turn, and that bluff token you can put down as a fake out for any other one. But then each player will take a turn and put a token down, either attacking somewhere or into the middle of a territory to potentially do one of the actions, as I say, whether it's a shinobi, whether it's a raid, whether it's a peace kind of a diplomacy action, until all players have placed them. Then all tokens are revealed at the same time, and they resolve in a particular order. Peace happens first, and then attacks all happen simultaneously. Attacks, defense. If you successfully defend a land, you get 1 additional defense for future attacks against it, and those points are also that sort of defense value is also your points at the end of the game. The game is played over 6 turns, and whoever controls the most territories and has the most points from their secret objectives at the end of the game wins. Now, the interesting this game is very much in the footsteps of the big Game of Thrones board game, where have you played that at least maybe once? Yeah. So you put out your tokens onto the map, and they do different things, your orders. And this one is very similar, but it plays in, I'd argue, a quarter of the time, but has a very similar feel to that game. And as you take over territories, you get access to additional single-use powers. You also have cards in your hand that let you look at players' tokens, let you remove players' tokens. If you're the first player in a 3 to 5 player game, because there's a huge disadvantage to going first, you have this special power where you can actually look at and remove a token from one other player in a round. But those special powers are different every game. There's 2 of each, depending on the territory that you take over. And if you don't use a power, somebody takes over that territory, then they get that power. So you got timing windows to think about as to when you can play them. And turned out that actually it's quite a good game overall. The sort of intrigue element and the bluffing element was really interesting. The powers were all quite bonkers, but in a game where everything's overpowered, nothing's overpowered, right? You would hope to gain access to a comparable number of powers as your opponents. Only managed to play it 3 players, which made the map a little wider open than a higher player count might. And I think playing at that higher player count would be very knife fight in a phone box type deal, as players really have more tokens to defend with and fewer to attack with, so it's much more strategic in where you go for your attacks, whether you're working towards your objective of taking over an enemy territory, or whether you're trying to control certain regions or have the most diplomacy icons on the board, or whatever those objectives are. And it's a keeper in the end, and definitely looking forward to playing it with the sort of full complement of 5 or potentially just 4 players to really get that tighter feel from the game. It ended up being very enjoyable. But something I don't say super often after the first play of a game is this game needs an expansion. And whether that's just more variability in the cards that you can get access to and the powers you have access to, it will become quite... I don't know. I become quite stale from what's out there quite quick. But the game really evolves around player actions anyway, so you don't need 100 different cards that it could be. Knowing what's coming up might be of value, but it does just feel like it's missing. There's a level missing, and I couldn't 100% put my finger on it. It feels like the kind of thing that gets fixed in the expansion, but that could also just be because we only played it 3 players as well.
Is there an expansion?
There is not. I doubt there's an expansion in the works. Yeah. So the newest...
I was going to ask, is it still available?
Yes, I believe Battle for Rokugan is still available to purchase. But the new game set within Rokugan is River of Gold. And that is being published by Office Dog, because FFG's really become a shell of its former self since it's been gutted by
Asmodee.
The Asmodee group, yeah.
Is Office Dog another subsidiary of...
Yes, of Asmodee, yeah.
Right, so they've just taken their Rokugan setting away from FFG and...
It's just odd.
Is River of Gold a similar sort of thing, or it's a different kind of game?
No, it's more... Imagine Tokaido plus.
Tokaido in Legend of the Five Rings.
Well, a little bit, because you're going down you're moving down. You can move sort of as far as you want, type deal. I think at least.
I'm just thinking, the Five Rings is so violent and Tokaido's so peaceful.
Peaceful, yeah. No, it just seems to be quite similar-ish mechanisms, but there's much more added on than sort of set collection or what Tokaido offers.
Sure.
It is actually on Board Game Arena and beta at the moment, I think, so I should give it a go.
Right, well there you go. You can try out River of Gold on BGA, or you can find Battle for Rokugan still available in the wild. This is just a quick intervention to say that Battle for Rokugan is very out of print and quite hard to find, so we were just wrong about that. Sorry everyone.
Yep. So 2 bangers for me, 1 terrible game for you. What's next?
I did also get to play Through the Desert, which is not terrible, but I've got another terrible game lined up. And I'm reticent to call it a terrible game outright, because I didn't play it under the best circumstances. However, it looks like you might have played it and also didn't like it. So, this was a review copy I received from the publisher. It's called Psycho Killer, the card game, and...
Qu'est-ce que c'est?
So this is called Psycho Killer, and it's published by Escape Tabletop Games, designed by Michael Wilkinson and Mitch Young, and the art is by Michael Wilkinson as well. And one of the reasons so they had offered a review copy, and one of the reasons I agreed to take it was because I like horror. I like horror stuff. I like the Psycho Killer tropes. So I thought, this is a sort of a fast-playing card game for a party-sized group. It goes up to 6. It plays 2 to 6. The community agrees best at 4. I played it at 2. And I thought, maybe there would be moments of enjoyment at a higher player count. But as a game, it is hard. It's a deck of cards. It comes in actually a lovely box, which is a VHS tape. And you can get additional little expansions which are in cassette tape boxes. And the actual presentation, the art on the cards, and the quality of the cards and the boxes were all very pleasing. So I have no real complaints about any of that stuff. The game itself is a deck of cards, and what you do is you shuffle together the whole thing and then divide it into 2. We didn't actually play with either of the expansions, although I was sent those as well. I'm not sure if they're going to make enough of an impact to change my mind, but I certainly will try them if I ever have a chance. But the deck itself is split into 2 piles, and then players just start drawing cards. And so on your turn, effectively what you have to do is play any number of cards from your hand and also draw a card off the top of the deck. And then if it happens to be the Psycho Killer, you have to play it immediately. It could also be a terrible event like, Lost in the Woods or, the Eyes in the Dark or something, creepy board horror tropey stuff, which was all very appealing actually. And you might have to reveal that right away unless you're currently in a state where your friends have left you for dead, and then you can keep it in your hand and play it on your friends, and it becomes a gotcha card. The rest of the cards are weapons that the psycho killers might use to get you, or sort of, again, tropes that you can play on your friends or for yourself that might hinder them and help you out. And what you're trying to do really with the game is you're collecting these. It's a sort of a hand management, one big loser type game. So you've got these weapon cards in the deck, and these are all the weapons that the Psycho Killer's coming at you with, and you don't want to have them in your hand when one of those Psycho Killer cards is turned over from the top of the deck, because then you have to play all the weapon cards that are in your hand face up onto the table, and they become like your injury pool, and whoever has the most injuries at the end of the game is the loser. And so there are 5 psychopath cards throughout the deck, and once all 5 are flipped over, the game is over. Whoever has the highest injury count is the loser. And the weapons are all different. The Psycho Killer cards all do about 3 damage. So if you flip that comes into your injury pool as well. You've taken 3 damage. But then you've got the screwdriver, which is just 1 damage, and the chainsaw, which is the worst, which does 5 damage. And so while you've got those in your hand, you want to find cards like you've dropped your keys, and then you can play that on your friend. Oops, you dropped your keys, and then you can give them cards from your hand. So it's like, here's the chainsaw. Now you're going to get screwed up. And you can also find cards like bandages or shut the door. Bandages will remove some stuff from your injury pool. You'll put it back into the deck, and you can kind of set up sabotages for your friends. And shut the door lets you, if you draw a Psycho card, you effectively draw a new card off the same deck and put the Psycho back. So it's still there, but now you have like a minute to try and get those weapons out of your hand, if you can, before someone draws the Psycho card that everyone knows is there. Unless they don't, because they also think they have the most weapons, and then they won't draw it. So there's a little bit of sort of like seeding the deck and stuff like that you can do. But overall, certainly at 2 players, it was a sort of, it went on too long. It was kind of a gotcha luck fest. There's really not enough strategy. And I think maybe at a higher count, it might have turned into some sort of like, just humorous gotcha fun. But it sounds like you've had a different experience to that.
No, well, I'm in the same situation. I was also playing 2 players. And also in not the best environment. So not this one gone, but the one before, the UK Games Expo. It was set up at the table, and myself and one other went to play, and the people that were there were unable to explain the rules, so we had to learn from the rule book in the first instance, which was fine. We kind of got there, but we immediately had some questions that came up. I can't remember what they are now, but that we were not 100% on being able to answer, and again the people at the booth were unable to assist for those, and we had the exact same experience. Like we were hoping it was just a 15-minute kind of quick fun party game, and it just dragged, and by the time we didn't even finish, like we got to the 20-minute mark or so, and we're just like, this is not fun. There's other things to be doing at the expo, and it did, because it is a very take that style game, and you're just passing back and forth the sort of bad cards and setting up other people, and then you get got, and then they get got, and you get got, and it just never seemed like it was in any danger of ending. And I see on Board Game Geek that that it's 100% not recommended at 2. So it's one of those games that should probably just be 3 to 6 players on the box. Yeah,
I think you're probably right about that. So I think given that Escape Tabletop Games are kind enough to send me a review copy, I will try to get a play of it at 4. That's the recommended player count. I might throw in the expansions as well if I get a chance. But the one thing I'd say about it is that there are some really odd choices in it. The first odd choice is that you start with no cards in your hand. So the first rounds are just drawing cards.
Yeah.
And you could be unlucky and pull a Psycho Killer at that stage, and there are cards that play off of there being Psycho Killers in people's injury pools. So it could be the case that they're trying to sort of seed the board at the start in a way that feels fair to allow the play of those other cards later. But it also feels like you don't really start playing the game until about 10 rounds in when everyone's drawn 5 cards. Or, 15 or 20 turns in if you're playing at 4 players, and everyone's drawn about 5 cards. And now suddenly people have cards in hand. And there were also sort of odd... there's also the odd idea that it's first to draw the 5 Psycho Killers. So you could have a game that is very, very short if you shuffle them all to the top. Or you could have a game that's really, really long. You could also shuffle all 5 of them into one half of the deck, and then if players are taking from the other half, the game goes on way too long. Like, it feels like... I'm not sure why there's 2 decks. There are a lot of cards that work with this, and I understand actually why there are 2 decks, because certain decks will put like a Psycho Killer back on top, or let you look at 3 cards and then rearrange them. And so the other deck, presumably, is to give people a different option. But it also leads to could potentially lead to these fringe scenarios where the game length is really unpredictable. And there were also these moments where we would play out all of the cards in our hand and then sort of be back to 0 cards. And we'd have these big injury pools or whatever, but we'd have 0 cards in hand, and then the game would kind of sort of grind to a halt for a little bit while we just sat and drew cards up again.
Yeah.
So that was a bit of an odd decision there. I don't know why you don't just have draw 2 cards, or have a separate sort of helper deck and you get 1 helpful card and then you have to draw from the potentially dangerous deck or something like that. It just feels like there were sort of better ways to do a similar kind of thing that might be a little less random and also lead to a little less sort of jerky game pace, running out of plays to make and things like that. But as I say, I'll try it at a higher count. There are some fun cards in the expansions, but it's definitely like a gotcha card party game. And insofar as those go, I'm not a big fan of many of them. So it's not exactly a genre that I play very often or that necessarily appeals to me. And I do think I would probably pick this over Exploding Kittens. So...
What about Unstable Unicorns?
Yeah, I didn't care for that either. So maybe I'm just not a fan of the genre. But I think also this is actually a genre that kind of relies a lot on theming, and I do like the theme of Psycho Killer. And I do like the artwork as well, even though it's very basic. It's got the horror tropes down, and that's nice.
Nice. Well, I'm going to continue on the banger train, I think. And speaking of trains, it's Trains. So Trains is a 2012 game designed by Hisashi Hayashi and published by AEG. I say published by, I don't know if it's still available. I think it's very hard to new, it's very hard to come by now, and I see no signs of a reprint. So I've managed to pick up Trains, the standalone expansion Rising Sun, and the Coastal Tides expansion for a not unreasonable price. And if you've not seen it, Trains was is a deck building train management game. I say train management. There's like a map, and you have a deck builder element to control what you can do in a turn, and then you're trying to connect your rail network to different cities which have a number of stations, which is how you're going to score most of your points. You'll get points for going to remote locations. You'll get points with the expansions to by joining up certain areas based on the different maps that you're playing. Completing those also gives you a special power, so special one-off power. But the core part of the game is deck building, so similar to Dominion or even Arnak and Dune, as we've spoken about, but this is much more in line with Tyrants of the Underdark, where deck building is the core component of the game. It's just the board lets you spend those cards in a way that develop your position on the board. And so this was very much following on from Dominion, coming out just 4 years afterwards, and is based on the sort of modern Japanese rail system. And the game is a little different from some deck builders because of the board element and because of the spatial planning element, but basically on your turn you might play a number of trains to generate resources. You'll generate rails, or you'll play a card that lets you place a rail, which is just connecting your network. But depending on where you're building it, whether it's on a mountain, a field, through a forest, or again in the expansion across water, depends on how expensive it is, and that's just represented by the number of trains that you can play onto there. But the different part from this is almost everything you do that's useful generates waste. And so if I were to lay rails and build a station in the turn, I'd be picking up at least 2 waste cards, which are just dead cards to put into my deck, which I then have to think about how to get rid of. Unlike other deck builders though, I don't need a specific card to trash waste. I can instead just pass my whole turn and discard any waste in my hand or trash any waste in my hand to put it back on the pile. But if you have a more efficient way of getting rid of waste, whether that's by spending a particular or playing a particular train that will let you discard waste from your hand, or whether it's by playing one that will let you discard it from your discard pile or trash it from your discard pile, you're looking for more efficient ways of doing that, because if you keep building railways and you keep building stations, eventually you're going to have it very quickly outpaces your ability to buy new cards to put into your deck. So you're staring down the barrel of 4 waste cards and a starter train, and suddenly you can't do anything in a turn. So at that point you would pass and get rid of the waste. So it kind of works out as a sort of balancing mechanism. If you get out that quick start, you've got to consider whether putting out 2 stations is worth it, because you'll have 2 extra waste in your deck. You can also buy victory point cards, which is actually probably the main way you'll get points other than visiting remote locations. Scores aren't typically very high, sort of 50-ish, maybe a bit under depending on how you play. And I really enjoyed my play of it back in 2012, and I had hardly seen it since, or had hardly played it since. Finding out it seems to be getting a little bit difficult to get a hold of, I happened to go on one of the Facebook forums and saw somebody selling the collection. There's a number of promo maps from things like Gen Con and different events that are out there, but they're very hard to come by, and they're not really necessary. But the good thing about the expansions is it provides 2-player maps, which are effectively half size, to make it 2 3-player maps to just make it much more tight, because when you play on the larger maps, like say Ticket to Ride Europe at 2 players, the map's very open. This at least makes you compete, because also moving into same space as other players, you pick up waste. There's just loads of ways of getting waste, but buying a victory point card gets you waste. There's a lot of ways to have a bad deck. But again, very good game. Played it. There's an official solo version. I winged the solo version and had a really good time, and I finished I beat the computer 37-36. And so I might I might play another few games with my solo version and then stick it on the Board Game Geek forums. I don't know whether it just so happened that I happened to have the perfect level of competition for what I was doing, or whether it works sort of universally. There is a couple of bots on Board Game Geek, but I just winged it. I just came up with it on the fly, and it was great. Anyway, another great game. You never played Trains?
No, I've never played Trains. I heard good things about it when it came out, which is quite a while ago now. I guess it must have been early
2012,
2010s.
so 12 years.
Yeah, 2010s, yeah. I heard good things about it, and I always thought that I would like it, but I never picked it up. Probably because at the time my partner and I were still very much happy playing Dominion, and so I was like, oh, do I need another one? But
you want to talk Dominion? I'll talk Dominion.
yeah, it's also hard to get her into trains. So, as a theme, it wasn't really working.
Gosh darn normies.
They did a spin-off, not a spin-off, but like a sister game called Planes, didn't they?
And automobiles.
So 3 of them.
Yeah, but Planes kind of came about. Planes isn't particularly interesting. It's moving through an airport to get to your plane.
Okay, so it's not about actually flying planes.
No, so they had trains and then planes, which just had nothing to do with trains. And then everybody just kind of bullied them into making automobiles. For like Planes, Trains and Automobiles, the movie. And I don't know anything about automobiles. I think it's just like NASCAR racing. But they're unrelated other than they look the same on your shelf.
I see.
But Trains, recommended, still good. I think it's a little... I need to play it a bit more to see if it can go up the rankings. It's a little slower. It's a lot slower than a normal or a straight up deck builder. Not as slow as Imperium Classics or Horizons, but it is definitely more of a 2-player game you can knock out in 20 minutes if you know what you're doing. But I just mean the feeling of progression is slower than building an engine in, say, Dominion.
And I my favorite part of Dominion, is optimizing the deck as opposed to
winning,
yeah, or the most efficient path to well, in any game where big money is the right strategy, I lose because I'm too busy trying to optimize the machine.
Yeah.
And so if the game is all about sort of managing waste and getting that out of your deck and trying to make it more efficient, I think that's either going to really appeal to me as I sit there trying to, keep my engine efficient, or it's really going to aggravate me because I can never reach peak efficiency.
Yeah, there are other things like, there's other ways to lay rails, there's other station buildings, there must be, within the expansions, there must be 60 different cards to play with, like in your kingdoms, maybe probably more actually, I don't even know. So there's a load of, you've got the same problem solving ability. So what do you do when you've got a train set up that has no trashers? What do you do when you've got a train set up that has no other ways to lay rails? What if you're playing one of the maps that's a really densely populated city area, but you've no way of getting stations down? It's the same kind of puzzle that you face in those, because it's a fixed marketplace as well. It's not a cyclical marketplace like Star Realms, or it's more kingdom based.
Yeah, well, that's often a deal breaker for me with these sort of deck builders, because I really just like the cyclical marketplace typically. Just the idea that you're having to be very reactionary and tactical about what you're playing is frustrating.
So sorry, you like or dislike the
I dislike the cyclical marketplace. I prefer the fixed marketplace. So I was always a bigger fan of Dominion for that reason, and by the sounds of it, Trains as well.
Yeah, you probably like Trains. Right, less mediocre games. Give us some more bangers.
So I played a new game. It's a Kickstarter that's just arrived. Big bloated box full of plastic and miniatures. Of course, I'm kidding. It's actually Sea Dragons, a tiny little polyomino game full of wooden pieces. It's actually got so many wooden pieces in it, Barry, that it's got 5 players, and at the 5th player count, you use fewer pieces. So they've got a color that comes with less pieces. So they didn't have to give the full complement of wooden pieces for every color, because
what if that's your colour? People must be raging about that in the forums.
Oh yeah, no. If you like yellow, you're in bad luck in Sea Dragons. You can only play at 5. So I received a copy of Sea Dragons, which was funded on Kickstarter via crowdfunding by Draco Stable, the publisher Draco Stable. It is designed by Yaniv Kahara, Phil Schechter, and Simone Luciani. And this is one that I backed because I like Simone Luciani's fingerprints on things generally, and also it's polyominoes, But what you're doing is you've got a hand of 2 cards, each representing a different polyomino, and then on your turn you play one and draw a new one. And you can draw it from either a little rotating marketplace or blind off the top of the deck. And there's 3 different sets of cards, which represent 3-piece polyominoes, 4-piece polyominoes, and 5-segment polyominoes. And all in different sort of configurations. So you've got the long one, the L shape, the box, and so on. And on your turn, when you play the card, you can take these dragon pieces you've got. You've got a set of sea dragon heads, and then a big pile of sea dragon bodies. And when you play the polyomino, you put the head down as one section of the polyomino, and then the rest become its body. And you play it out onto a board, which is a grid of sea spaces. And there's a central island at the center that divide up the board into 4 quadrants. And then each quadrant has all kinds of things going on in it. And they're all kind of mirrors of each other. They're asymmetrical. They're not all the same layouts, but they've all got the same sort of thing going on in the quadrants, which is a whole big series of whirlpools, some pirate ships, some coral reefs, and some lost doubloons, treasure. And so when you put your sea dragon out, it must either extend out of the center island or not be adjacent to any of your other sea dragons. And that's pretty much the only rule.
Does it not also have to touch, if it doesn't touch an island, does it not have to touch another player's dragon?
Yes, you're dead right about that. It has to touch another player's dragon, but it can't be your own.
Yeah.
And then for each other player's dragon that it does touch, that player's going to get $1, which is important because $1 is a point at the end of the game. Or a doubloon. Or a piece of gold, whatever. So on your turn you just play one polyomino piece, draw a new card. Everyone's got the same number of dragon heads, and when you all run out of dragon heads, the game is over, and there's going to be a winner. And you're going to get points from all over the place. There's a lot of scoring in this game. There is a number of strategies as well. So you're going to get points from many different sources in the game. It's all endgame scoring. I mean, you'll amass points during the game, but you don't need to worry about tracking anything until the end of the game. And it's going to come from contracts that you can score. So the game kind of presents itself as awarding the most points for territory control. At the end of the game, you're going to be checking who has the most dragon heads in each quadrant. And then if you're tied, it's amongst the most dragon body segments of the tied players. And you're going to get a bunch of points for each quadrant. And what's fun as well is that the value of each quadrant is actually equal to 3 times the number of whirlpools. So you can hatefully cover up whirlpools in quadrants you don't think you're going to win. Right. But you have to pay money for that. Okay, so you're getting points from everywhere. There's going to be a set area majority for each of the 4 quadrants. It's going to be most dragon heads, and if players are tied, then it's most body segments. But you'll also get points for any leftover money you have and any leftover pirate tokens you have. You're also trying to collect the pirate tokens and spend them for contracts, because there's going to be a marketplace of contracts that are looking for a specific set of pirate tokens, and if you get the right set, there's 4 colors. If you get the right set, you can trade it in for a contract on your turn. Keep that for the end of the game. It's a much bigger margin than 1 point per token. You can also get these reef cards, and the reef cards are typically money or pirate tokens, and they can be traded in immediately to fulfill that purpose. But some of them are also hidden dragons, and you can play them at the end and they will add a dragon head to a particular quadrant. And so if that's a quadrant you're competing in, you could have a surprise. I have an extra majority in this area. And so it's really fast. It's really quite light playing, goes up to 5 players. We had a really nice time. It was really pleasant. And as the game progresses, you start off and you want to get all the big 5-piece dragons, and then later on you want to play the 3 pieces, but you're also not allowed, when you take a card, a new polyomino piece, you're not allowed to take the same color as the one you just played. So if you play a small one, you have to take a medium or a large next. So there's like sort of constraints and puzzly bits, and you don't want people to take your spots, and they inevitably always take your spots. We played it at 4. It was really nice, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think if you like quick, fast polyomino type stuff, you'll enjoy it. My only real criticism, and the art's really nice. It's got very pleasing art, and the pieces are all very nice and wooden and screen printed, and everything about the production was just really nice. All the C quadrants are double-sided, and you just put them out randomly, so you can have like either side at random. So there's probably quite a lot of potential configurations there. My only criticism was that these hidden dragon cards in the Reef deck, you can draw into them quite late game, and they can be quite consequential. So if you draw them early game, you can play into them, maybe. But I drew a couple quite early game, and they were already sort of redundant. And, well, because I wasn't playing into... One of them was for a quadrant I was already winning, and the other was for a quadrant that I wasn't playing into. So neither of them were particularly consequential. And even though I had the hidden dragon card for that quadrant, there was no way I was making up that ground because people were competing for it quite viciously. Meanwhile, another player drew a couple of hidden dragon cards that were for 2 quadrants they were competing in that were very contentious and definitely swung the game in that player's favor. And they actually beat me by like 3 points, I think, in a game that scores over 80. So it definitely was quite significant. It didn't bother me. It doesn't bother me. I'd had fun. I enjoyed the game. I liked the polyominoes, and I liked the sort of the puzzly part of it. But I could see those cards annoying some people, given how random they are, and you can't really do anything about them. It almost felt kind of like I don't know why they're there. Is
there any way to dig through the draw deck?
No, so you can't ever scout the Reef deck.
Right, okay.
And I'd be tempted to just take them out and see what happens, but I suspect they're there so people can't be completely sure who's won each segment until the very end. And that's fair enough if you don't want it to be too deterministic. But I just felt like, if I'd lucked into because there's the 4 quadrants, if I'd got 2 cards for the same quadrant or either of the other 2 quadrants, it would have made a big difference to my score, and that's kind of annoying.
Fair enough.
Not annoying enough. The game is very short, and it's quite fun.
You put up with more luck in shorter games, right?
Well, yeah, exactly. And there's probably less perceptible luck as well. Like, I'm sure some of the contracts that flipped up were probably quite good for me, and I wasn't really tracking. Maybe for other people, they were getting contracts on their turn that were becoming available that were no good for them. So there's probably an element of luck there. It's just less perceivable. But anyway, I enjoyed Sea Dragons, and I'll be bringing it out more in the future to play.
It looks good.
Also medium to light filler game.
Very pretty game for people to see on the table.
Yeah, good table presence and lovely wooden pieces as well.
Ooh, I love a wooden piece. A game that has a few wooden pieces is Brazil Imperial. So we spoke about this on a previous podcast. I'd purchased it. I can't remember if I said why I purchased it. Did I say why I purchased it?
This was the impulse buy because of your young children.
Correct, yes. So anyway, I purchased this. And finally got a few games, and I also bought the Automata expansion and played a few solo games as well, just to get to grips with it. So Brazil Imperial, which I think you've played, so we can have a little chat about, but it is a 4X game, right? And I use 4 in quotes because it's not so much extermination. But so X is expand, exploit, what's the other ones? Expand,
explore, exterminate.
Expand, exploit, explore, exterminate. Set within Brazil, and during a time... Well, actually, they've got characters from a number of time periods that you can play as, with each colour or each sort of asymmetric player powers based on which leader you choose, and also which colour you are has different PCs. But basically you've got asymmetric player PCs. They're not super different. You've got asymmetric player powers, which are quite varied and give you something to work towards, typically early game. And the maps, there's a variety of maps. It's a modular map that you can build up. You put out different things, tiles face down, which you can go and explore to get additional resources. But mostly you're building up your empire by gathering resources to, or having access to resources to build new buildings within your empire, and then you might go out exploring, and if you encounter somebody else's PCs you may get involved in a spot of fisticuffs. It is the interesting part of the game is how you choose your actions, and this is where I said I might not like it if it was too much like Scythe, but yes, it is similar. I see where it's similar, but again, not quite the same feel for me as Scythe gave me. And basically you choose an action on your turn and you get the ability. There's the potential to upgrade those abilities by spending resources to take that upgraded ability, but then you have to pick a different action again the next time, so you can't just keep doing the same action over and over. The actions let you deploy pieces to the map. They let you purchase paintings, which are sort of your engine building elements, give you additional powers. You can upgrade your actions. You can swap resources, trade resources. You can also refresh your resources on the board, available for you to spend them again. And each one of those also gives you a certain type of move, which might be you can move a piece onto forest, you can move a piece next to the coastline, in addition to the one basic move you get every turn. So basically you choose one of these actions, what you want to do for the turn. After you take that action, you get your free move, or your singular move, and then you usually have a conditional move associated with that as well. If you get onto a tile, you flip it over, see what it is. It could be that there's somebody there to fight, the bandits you have to defeat if you have a strong enough military presence. It could be there's a resource there, or it could be some kind of permanent bonus tile that's there. Maybe give extra resources to those surrounding them, or a couple other things that are in it. And the whole game works very smoothly. It's very quick. Your one action before it moves on is just like super quick. Whatever action you pick, it's very straightforward what you want to do. If you're spending your resources to buy a farm, you just do that. You put your farm out, it's the next player's turn after you've done your move, and it just goes round and round and round and round really quickly until somebody places their fourth palace, I want to say, is the end game trigger, or maybe there's no paintings left. There's a couple of different ways to end the game. And then you add up the points for the end, and the points are basically the buildings you've built, the points you've got during the game, the pieces you've got in the board. So Scythe or Terra Mystica style, where bits off the board and they give you points at the end. And it is fine, but that is not good enough to keep. So I did think I'd be getting rid of it, and I will be getting rid of it is the end of it. I want to play it another time before I do, with 4 players. Played it 3 players, played it 2 players, played it 1 player. So I wouldn't mind giving it a full compliment before getting rid of it. But it was just okay. I don't know how you felt about it.
Between the 2 of us, then, we've played it at every count, because I've only played it once at 4 players.
Right.
And it was just okay.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with it. The combat is almost non-existent, which is, again, very similar to Scythe. And the one bit of combat that there was, you only need to attack somebody by going onto their space, and it is it's not deterministic. You can play a couple of combat cards, so again, a little bit like Scythe. But once you're there, you're only going to take it over in order to spend that person's resources or for the end game points by sitting on it at the end. But usually the only combat that we've seen was somebody popping in to steal the resources and leave again. There's no protracted combat. There's no huge reason to keep attacking somebody, which in many ways is good, but for and it's not particularly permanent either. If they've got nobody there, all you're doing is taking over one of their buildings for a turn, and then normally you're moving on again because there's other things to be doing with your PCs.
In the game we played, it felt like there were much more useful sort of exploration and expanding things to be doing with your pieces, rather than, the combat and taking a resource or potentially even points away from someone.
Yeah, it can work towards, if you've been unable to achieve your end game objectives, and you need to control a third plantation, you've not got the resources to build one, but you could go and take over somebody else's. That is one reason for it. Plus, you'll also get the 2 points or whatever it's worth at the end and deny the other person. But other than that, there's no mustering of armies to really go rampaging across the board. Was the downside to the extermination part of it. So it was quite amicable. Most of the game, people would take over their area, you'd kind of draw lines in the sand, and then you'd try your best to defend the buildings you had on the front line, and you could actually increase defence by getting the right kind of paintings, which will give you your particular buildings extra defence. You'd have your armies sitting on them to protect them against other players. But all in all, it was kind of I don't want to say soulless. It was enjoyable once we got the flow of it. It was a slow start, and then once we realised what we were doing on a turn, it was just super quick. And so, hats off for that. But it just wasn't interesting. It's not something I want to go back to time after time after time. It's something that I'd want to play another couple of times, and then, okay, I've done it.
Yeah, and I felt kind of the same, actually. I was possibly quicker to the okay, I've done it stage than you were. I mean, I would probably happily play it once or twice more, but I would not ever pick it. And that's just because, especially at the 4-player count, it wasn't actually an issue with downtime. As you say, it's paced quite well. But I think at 4 players, sitting down to play a sort of a game that appears to have player interaction, just wasn't enough for me.
Yeah, and you can absolutely finish all 3 objectives and never go near another person.
Yeah, and I actually wound up getting the bulk of my score by pure fluke. I collected a bunch of animals. It was like an animal set collection thing.
In my first game I did that. I managed to complete a whole set, and then I got most of a second set. And I wasn't 100% sure that you could score more than one set, but it seems punishing to not let you get what you've explored for.
Yeah, but also it's kind of like not something I'd really been intending to do, and just kind of something that happened kind of by chance. I can't remember if there's more to those exploration tokens or if they're just animals you collect, but they're random, right? So it's not like you're sort of really planning for it. You just get them.
Yeah, correct, yeah. But the more you uncover, the more chance you have of finding them, so.
Yeah, sure, yeah. But yeah, I just, it was sort of, as far as like, sort of asymmetrical civilization building, Euro sensibilities, 4X thing, totally functional game, but it just doesn't have any moments of major excitement. It doesn't have any tension with the other players. There's not really any amazingly tense timing issues. Even the paintings, which are a marketplace, which is first come, first served, never really felt like especially contentious. No cards were flipped over where everyone went, I need to get that first, So there was none of that. And so, although it was totally functional, and the puzzle was there and the logistics were there and you're trying to work out all these different things, and there's like, as Barry said, there's these sort of eras that pass, and you want to, and there's sort of timing around that, like you want to try to keep pace with the other players as they advance through the eras, because If you fall too far behind, you're going to miss out on opportunities to get objectives or something. I can't remember exactly how it goes.
Yeah. As soon as somebody moves into the second age, everybody's got all second age buildings available, but you won't score the points for your objective until you complete it.
Yeah, exactly. So you need to fulfill the requirements, even though your things are advancing. So there's a sense of having to keep up, but it never really sort of there wasn't a lot of sort of emotional investment at any stage of the game, and I'm looking for a game, especially a game of that size, which gives me some sense of emotional investment.
Which is perfectly fair, makes sense, but it is really, really quick. Like once everybody at the table knows what they're doing, I wouldn't be surprised if this game was legitimately 60 to 75 minutes to play a game. And
it's worth noting that when I played the 4-player game, although none of us had played before, we all had learned the rules in advance, and we just sat down, we set it up, we played it, and it was done in under 2 hours.
Yeah. And even for a first game, we were working it out. I did make an error during my first game. I randomly assigned leaders, not putting them with their corresponding player boards, which led to some interesting power changes. But I mean, there you go. There's a free variation for you. I won't put that on Board Game Geek later though.
Well, I think overall, that's. But it's not staying in my collection, and I don't think it's going to hang around in yours either.
No,
good
almost
for 3 or 4
plays. If I can get a game before it goes,
yeah.
I will. But not fussed if I don't.
Mm-hmm. On the topic of imperialism, I played a game about set during the Punic Wars. I don't think that's a particularly good segue. I actually also don't know if it's strictly the Punic Wars. This is ancient Greece. We're in the Aegean Sea for a game of Aegean Sea. It's the new Karl Chudek game. You might know Karl Chudek, and it's published by the company he works with all the time, which is Asmadi Games, and they published his major available card game, which is Innovation. If you haven't played Innovation, that's it can be played at more, but I've always played it as a 2-player head-to-head fight over historical progress. And of course, he's also quite renowned for having created the perennial out-of-print favorite, Glory of Rome. So, Karl Chudek is well known for cards that do many things, multi-purpose cards that have many functions, and typically also have some kind of crazy power on them. And he has strayed away from this a few times. He's designed a bunch of games. I've played 4 now, Aegean Sea being the 4th. I played the 2 I already mentioned. I also played a game called Blood of the Northmen. So he also designed a sort of it's Nordic Viking expansionism game called Blood of the Northmen, where you're moving people around the map. I played that too, but it was a lot more fuss than it was worth. So Aegean Sea is his new one. It's back to sort of the familiar territory of multi-purpose card play, and you are presented with all these different Greek factions. So you've got the Spartans, the Athenians, the Rhodians, did I say Sparta's in there? Anyway, there's five factions in total. Ephesus goes up to 5 players, but then one faction will be excluded. Again, like the Yellow Dragons and Sea Dragons, there's one faction you just can't use unless you're 5 players. We played 4 players, and you'll take these cards that represent islands, and they are just sea cards. They're just blank water cards, and you put them out in the middle, and then everyone gets an asymmetrical deck that belongs to their faction. And they'll shuffle that up, and they've also got a player aid, which doubles as their island. And so mechanically, the game works around this concept of islands, where the cards that you'll draw and hold in your hand have a different function on each edge of the card. And you'll tuck it under the island, under the left side, the right side, the top, or the bottom. And based on where you tuck it, it becomes something different. If you tuck it in the top, it's a temple. If you tuck it in the bottom, it's a population. It goes in the left, it becomes a ship. And if it goes in the right, then it becomes a good. And you'll do this on your home island, which is the player rate in front of you in your player color, and on the islands, the generic ones in the middle. You can also put the card on top of the island, and then you've claimed the island, and it becomes yours unless somebody else populates it. And it also gains the unique ability written on the center of the card. Each of the cards have a preference, and this is something that they like the look of. And each player's deck also matches the preferences. So the preferences are dyes and salts and wood and 2 other things. I was the Rhodians, which meant my deck was all brown, and the majority of my cards had a preference towards wood. And it gets a little bit complicated because on your turn, when you play a card from your hand, you take an action based on that card's preference, and then you can also do the power that's written in the middle of the card, which is usually some kind of bonkers thing. And they're all very, very asymmetrical, these decks. So they're very much focused on doing their own thing. For example, I think it was the Ephesian deck, but I'm not sure. Ephesus. I think they're trying to put out temples, loads and loads of temples everywhere. I was Rhodes, and I wanted to have ships, and I wanted to sail ships around and put ships out everywhere. And all my cards had, because I had a majority of cards with preference wood in my deck, it meant that I could play the action associated with wood more often, which was move your ships. But the different actions let you do different things, including building more temples, putting out population. But you're constantly being asked to audit these cards really ruthlessly, because when you play a card to take the action, you then have to play a second card from your hand to become the thing. So if you play a wood card to build a ship, then you have to play a second card from your hand that will actually tuck under the island to become that ship. The first card will be discarded. So having cards in your hand and knowing which to ditch to become ships or temples or people or goods is really important, and which ones you're going to hang on to and hope to play their bonkers powers later is also really important. If you've played Carl Chuddock games before, this kind of like sort of ruthless card auditing and bonkers powers will be very familiar to you. Albeit, this is the first game of his I've played where each player has a set, completely asymmetrical deck. The ultimate goal of the game is to play goods onto the islands that you control, and then use your ships to bring them back to your home board. Then you can amass the goods on your home board, and what you want is to get like-for-like goods. So a ton of wood, because you're going to count up each good you have of each type at the end and square that number. So if you have 2 dyes, that'll be 4 points. If you have 5 wood, that's 25 points. So you want to try to amass as much of the same good type as you can. But you have to be mindful that you can only collect goods from islands where you have control. And control comes from having played a card into the sea space previously, but it can be taken by people putting out population. If the population ever outnumbers you, then the player with the most population has control. And in the event of a tie, whoever played the original card will pick who has control. So you must, if someone plays 1 population, they'll take it away from you. You have to play a population to the island to take control of it. Some factions are really good at putting out population. Others are not so good. The Rhodes have a special power where they can actually steal goods from islands using boats, even if they don't control the island. So they're sort of sneaking in there and taking that stuff away. It's got a lot going on. I found it really quite difficult to engage with. All the other players seem to be doing a lot better at it than me. And I didn't know what I could do about that either. It could just be an issue of player skill. But I think that you really have to play into the asymmetry of your faction. Like, you really can't ignore that. You know, it gives you like 2 unique player powers, and you have to focus on that. and really hammer it. And I just didn't really figure out a good way to make ships and then exploit them. It's not a really long game, so if you're sort of not already going to hit the ground running with your engine, you're going to kind of be in trouble, I think. Or not your engine, sorry, because it's not really engine building. You're sort of, if you're not hitting the ground running with your strategy. Having said that, the Ephesians would earn points based on... So the game ends when somebody runs out of cards, and they go to draw cards, and they cannot. Actually, very specifically, they take what's called the refresh action, which is how you draw more cards, and they have no cards left in their deck. That ends the game. So there's some player agency over when the game ends. But the Ephesian player will, when they get down to their final card, even if they have to draw it, instead they'll reveal it, and then the preference on that card will match some of the temples they've built, right? Because all the temples you've built are just cards from your deck, and they all have a preference type. And mostly, for most players, the preference of a temple doesn't matter. For the Ephesians, they're going to look at that final card from their deck, find all the matching temples, and score 5 points or score a point for each one, or 5 points for each one. Yeah, 5 points for each one. Now, this is a low-scoring game. That's a huge amount of points. If they built nothing but die temples and then revealed die at the end, that would be an unassailable score. Having said that, like, there's literally no way that they can deliberately do that because they don't know what the last card in their deck is. So the only strategy is to build as many temples as possible and then just hope you reveal something you've built a lot of. And actually, our Ephesian player built 2 of every temple, but only 1 salt temple, and then revealed salt, of course. It also might not have been salt. It was a white resource. I can't remember. It might have been marble.
Surely you get extra points for being salty at the end, no?
Well, but what was sort of notable was there were sort of 2 things I took away. One was that the player who had the faction, who were good at creating goods and shipping them back to their home very well. Actually, they were as good at shipping it as anyone else. They were just really good at generating goods. And so they shipped them all back to their player board and they won. They almost lost.
Weren't you the shipping faction?
No, I'm the stealing goods faction.
Right, okay.
I'm good at making ships and moving them around, but I'm not good at actually generating goods.
Gotcha.
The other thing is I need twice as many ships to steal a good as you do to just ship a good around. But it's a little baffling because the same action that moves ships also creates them. So I'm constantly having to pick one or the other. But also the Ephesian player was actually basically completely ignoring goods and just focusing on building temples. And then I don't know if it was Sparta or the other, there's another faction which just builds statues. It's got its own asymmetric scoring again, and it just wants to build statues on islands. And so that player was focused on building statues. So actually the only one who was actually trying to do the goods was the faction who were good at generating goods. And so I was kind of just trying to rob them. But but I just didn't have the efficiency to get over there and do it in time for it to really make a big consequence. I think I probably needed to be focusing on this sort of commerce power I had more, where when I move like 2 boats out, I can place a good that matches one of them. But I hadn't really grokked the game well enough, and early, the few, I didn't make enough ships, and the few I did make all had the same preference, so that I could only generate that one type of good, which would have been great if I could then get all of that good coming back to me, because you want to amass a lot of the same type. But then the cards had become the ships, and so then I would have to discard a card from my hand with the preference matching the ship in order to generate the good. And I didn't have any of those preferences left because I'd turned them all into ships.
Right, yeah.
And that's a sort of like a strange mechanical nuance that you're definitely not going to get your first play.
Yeah, you'd have to know.
Well, it's sort of like, it's not completely unparsable, Like, you understand the distribution of preferences throughout the deck. You have a majority of this one type, and then you have the same amount of everything else. And so you've got, like, say, I think it's eight of each preference, right? But what I don't really understand is necessarily, like, how I should be valuing these things and how I should be judging how much to engage in these different kinds of investments. I felt like the temples thing and the statue thing were way more intuitive. I could have got on board with build temples way more easily, I think. The other thing that was notable is that the temples are also how you draw more cards. So you build temples to draw cards. I really struggled to build any temples. And as a result, when the game ended, I'd barely played half my deck. Because I just didn't have the efficiency of the temples. So I just really struggled to get the engine of that faction up and running. And there were a number of powers, like the bonkers powers in the center of the cards, that came up later in the game, which would have let me put out temples more efficiently and perhaps generate the card draw I needed to then, do more things. But they came up way later, and so I couldn't really make good use of them. I didn't have them at the start. So yeah, kind of a baffling game.
Fair. I mean, I'm not against games that you have to know a bit to do well at. But
no, nor am I. And the owner of the game, who's the only one who'd played it before, did make the point that sometimes you want a game that you don't just get right away. Mm-hmm. And actually, I really agree with that. Like, I play so many board games, and so many of them are so homogenous and similar that when something comes along and does something different, or I don't get it, or I've struggled to parse it on my first play, that's quite refreshing, actually, and quite nice. I'm not 100% sure that that's the case for Aegean Sea. I would definitely give it another crack, especially because it's not that long. But I do note that the player who owned the game and who was definitely most across it, who's a very good player, didn't win and didn't really know what to do about the player who'd won. In fact, they were in a position to also end the game, and I think they ended it because there was nothing more productive they could do.
Fair. Yeah, I mean, it's not super well reviewed, but it sounded interesting nonetheless. My favourite Carl Churrick game is Red 7.
I don't even know that one.
You never played Red 7?
Never played Red
It's the kind of game that I wish I came up with. It's super good. I mean, not we're talking about Red 7, but 7 cards of 7 colours, numbered 1 through 7. So the colours of the rainbow. And red's better than orange, which is better than violet, which is better than blue, which is better than indigo, right? So the colours of the rainbow stack, and each colour has its own rule, and what you're doing is playing cards into your palette, right? So into your tableau, which generally stay there, to match the current rule, and you have to be winning at the end of your turn or you're out. And so the red colour is the rule for red is highest card wins. And if I had a red and if I had the 7 and you had the 7, then the tiebreaker is colour. So the red 7 is the highest coloured card, followed by the orange 7, and all the way down. And it's great. It's super simple. There's a couple of extra rules with playing certain numbers gets you certain benefits, but basically you're either playing a card to your tableau to be winning with the current rule, you're discarding a card to the canvas to change the rule, or you're doing both. And the other rules are things like most cards under 4, most even numbers, most of one colour, those kind of things. And it's super good. Super good.
Well, there you go, Red 7. And that's also from Asmati Games.
Yeah, I mean, it's not going to give you the same experience, but it is. You should absolutely buy it. It's like super cheap. It's like a deck of cards. It's fantastic.
All right, Barry. What's your final title here?
Well, I might just throw out some honourable mentions. Did play a few games yesterday. Bust out Istanbul, which I haven't played in absolute ages. When did Istanbul come out? 2014, so that's another 10-year-old game. Designed by Rudiger Dorn, published by Pegasus Spiele. And I played it ages ago, liked it. Didn't really remember it, played it again, and again it's a really just quick, tense game. First to 5 rubies. You're a merchant with a stack of assistants. You can move 1 or 2 spaces around a randomly placed out 4x4 marketplace. Each place you go, you can either drop off an assistant or pick up an assistant, and then to activate the power that's there. And those powers do a variety of different things. Gather resources. You can expand your wheelbarrow to carry more resources. You can get special powers from the mosque. You can set your family members free from jail and send them somewhere to do some crimes for you. Actually, I'm not sure how on the up and up that move is, but you can do that. You can go to the post office to collect resources, all these different things. You can go to the ruby salesman to buy rubies with the money that you've earned from selling your goods, and you're just working. It's a race to those 5 rubies to win the game, or 6 rubies in a 2-player game. And Round of Ages, it's really solid. It's really good fun. This is a game that's easy to understand, but not necessarily optimized for, and people can somewhat interfere with you by capturing your family member, sending them back to jail, or being on the space you want to be on, so you've got to pay them money, things along those lines, and had a good time with that. You played Istanbul?
No, I haven't played.
You not played? I mean, it's a classic, right? And I think rightly so.
I was just thinking, I've got a few Rudiger Dorns, and I was trying to remember what else he did. Turns out the only one I've actually still got. Oh well, actually, this is an abridged list of notable games, so it's probably done more than this. But the one that I've still got is The Traders of Genoa, which is apparently his first game from 2001.
No, that's a long time ago. I like I quite like Luxor. It's more family weight, I would argue. Good game about going around inside of a pyramid, well, tomb raiding, effectively. It's quite good, and I quite like Las Vegas as well.
I love Las Vegas. I was going to mention that. I really like Las Vegas.
Well, I played a reasonable amount of Dragonheart on Board Game Arena. I think I'm over it now though, but it was quite good at the time.
I think Las Vegas, if you've got a group of people like down the pub, is possibly the best game for that. It's just like sort of it's like bidding. You're just bidding on casinos. You're rolling dice and bidding on casinos, and it's just a just good time, and a lot of you get money, and then it's a secret who's got the most money, and you're like, yeah, so and so's got the most money, and look at all these things they're winning. Get them, it's just fun. Genoa is also really good. Although it's been too long since I played it for me to really talk about it here on the podcast, but I might break that out again. It's been so long.
I'll throw one more honourable mention from yesterday's gaming for Isle of Cats.
Yep.
Just the base game. Now I own the big Kickstarter, bells and whistles, all the expansions type deal. I did own the roll and write, but I sold that at the expo because it's very, very similar to the full game. Much like Terraforming Mars and Terraforming Mars. What's the dice game? Ares Project.
Ares Expedition.
Ares Expedition.
It's Terraforming Mars, the card game. Which is obviously not the same as Terraforming Mars.
So,
which is not a card
Mars,
game.
The dice game, yeah. They're very different. But Isle of Cats is a polynomial game where you're rescuing cats by putting fish in baskets to capture them and then put them on your ship to try and catch the rats and fill all the space before pirates come or something. I forget what the story is.
It's the Great Evil one. It's the Great Evil one's coming to destroy the fantasy
the evil
land.
Lord Vesh. That's right.
And the cats are in the way. So you have to get them off the island before he passes it and kills everyone.
Yeah. But the card drafting element at the start or start of each round where you're spending your money, which is fish in this case, to keep cards, when you play them, how you play them, jockeying for sort of first player by putting them, boots to get up earlier, and how many cats you're going to be able to catch, because you've got cheap cats and expensive cats to try and catch and put them all out. Like the base game, I think the base game is really solid. In fact, you know what? I'm going to up my rating. I only gave it a 6.5 for the base game. I'm going to go all the way up to a 7. Boom. Changed. And I had good time with it. I want to play more again with the expansions, put out some kittens and big spider creatures and everything else that comes with all the 40 different expansions.
Yeah, I've played a lot of Isle of Cats, and it is very much sort of like a polyomino complete the grid puzzle, right? Where you are drafting cards, drafting polyominoes, and then slotting them into a grid. And the grid is quite punitive. It's full of rooms and rats, and if you don't fill up the rooms and cover up the rats, then you'll get a lot of negative points at the end. But where the vast majority of your scoring is coming from, and you cannot be ignored, are these cards that you're drafting during the drafting round, which are called lessons. They give you asymmetrical scoring, and they're secret. So you're drafting these asymmetrical objectives that you must complete in order to score, but you're also drafting cages which you need to catch the cats, as well as cool one-off powers and what are called rare finds, which can be particularly rare cats that are wild and take up a lot of space on the boat, or actual rare treasures which are worth points. And a lot of the game is actually automated. Other than the card drafting round and the cat drafting round, people are mostly just slotting things into their boats, and then you're dealing out new cards and putting out new cats and giving everyone more fish. I can understand that some people have criticized the amount of sort of upkeep each round, where, the exciting gameplay is in the card drafting and the cat drafting, and the rest of it's kind of upkeep. And I can understand that criticism, but for a game that is polyominoes, which is not a shared board, so everyone's got their own boat that they're filling up with cats, this game feels like it's got a decent amount of player interaction. It feels like it's got a decent amount of player interaction, and the puzzle feels quite different every time and quite exciting. I'm a big fan of Isle of Cats. I really, really like it. I've played all the expansions as well. I mean, they're all fairly small and modular, but they're nice. And it's a nice way to sort of add a bit more to the game. Hearty recommend from me.
Two Thumbs Fresh, and that's designed by Frank West and published by the City of Games. All right, take us home, Mike. What we finishing on?
Just a public service announcement, really, for those of you that made it to the end of the podcast. If you heard me talk about Luthier, which is coming to Kickstarter from Patterson Games, I have played a full game of it. I've played the prototype, and maybe I'll talk about that in a future episode. But for now, it is just been put up on TTS. So if you are intrigued by the game and you want to try it out before you back it, you can find the module on TTS and play it there. I would describe it as a medium to heavyweight game. It's certainly on the more medium side than the heavy side. There's a lot of crunch in it, but the actual game is not, it's not that rules heavy. There's not a massive amount of overhead. So you can get into it pretty quick and start playing pretty quick. It does have blind bidding for actions, so most of your Euro sensibilities are going to be frustrated by the fact that you have to keenly prioritize and hope that you can try to guess what other people are prioritizing. To that end, when I played the full game, the prototype, I played it 2, and it felt like it wanted more players. You can add in the solo mode automata to make the 2-player game feel more like a 3-player game, but I think if you are going to be interested in trying this game properly, then you probably want to find 2 or 3 friends to play it on TTS with you. All right, and that wraps up another episode of the Ready Steady Play podcast,
aka Ready Steady Podcast.
We'll be back in a couple of weeks to talk more about more stuff we played and the games that you should be paying attention to. And they may be new and they may not be. So make sure you do whatever you need to do to find out when that's happening. And of course, a big thanks to all the Patreon supporters on the Patreon for Ready Steady Play. This content is a part of their support and they make it happen. Thanks, guys. You can say bye, everyone.
Thanks. Bye. Bye.
Bye.